those songs like Strawberry Fields and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Helter Skelter, those are like really heavy songs that are going to be studied until the end of time.
Hello, my name's Paul McCartney. This is Ringo Starr. This is John Lennon. I'm George Harrison.
Welcome back to the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. I'm your host, Jack Lawless. Today I have the honor of introducing a modern day music icon onto the podcast. No other than the legendary Jeremiah Fraites of the Lumineers. There's no doubt that Jeremiah has been one of the most influential musicians of the last 2 decades, with many current artists citing the Lumineers as an influence. Jeremiah is a songwriter and multi-instrumentalist for the band, and also a critically acclaimed solo artist. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into Jeremiah's influences, how he discovered the Beatles and his love for music, how it feels to be in one of the most influential bands in music at the moment, and so much more. Now, I've loved the Lumineers' music ever since I was in high school, so this episode is definitely one of my favorites. So let's jump into the discussion. Hey, Jeremiah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I admire your work as a musician and a creative so much, and I can't wait to dive into our conversation. I just have so many questions. But can you start by telling us what got you into music? How did you discover your love for music in general?
I think for me, music it wasn't something I even chose. I met a lot of people over my life that say things to me like, "Oh, I wish I could play guitar. I wish I could play piano." For me, like it never was something that I chose to do. I feel like I started at a later age though than most people. I was one of my first earliest memories of music was me and my brother. My brother, we had like a 3 or 4 year age gap, and he bought, I feel like Mozart. He got a CD of Mozart, I want to say, and I got a CD of Beethoven. And I'd be like, Beethoven's sicker. And he was like, no, Mozart. And so it was just classical music. And I remember we had this really old school, sort of like cool stereo in our house in New Jersey where we grew up. We put the CD in, and all that. And really fell in love with Beethoven at an early age. Probably didn't start. We had an old organ in my house that I messed around with. And my mom, she always kind of reminds me and tells other people, you never really touched the piano or the organ like most kids did. A lot of kids would go up and like sort of smash it with all their hands and bang it or whatever. She said I sort of approached it from this like curiosity, this sort of sensitive touch. I don't know, like I was almost like observing it or you know, just curious about it. And I thought that was kind of neat. But yeah, I think music really was always in me. And when I got a drum set, summer of eighth grade, going into freshman year of high school, so probably around 13 or getting that drum set really, everything changed. I got into drums, learning drums, and then my love of piano came back. So, by the time I was 17, 18, I'd already been in a few different bands. And I was like, I never want to be in a band with a singer. I arrogantly thought that like everything that had been sung about had already been sung about, if that makes sense. Like things about love and life and heartbreak and all that stuff. It was like, I'll never be with a lyricist. I just want to make instrumental music and I like complicated music and all that. And was making a lot of music. And was actually, believe it or not, making sort of these like rap and hip hop beats, these instrumental beats. We didn't even have anybody to give them to, but me and my buddy Justin. My dream, I think, at the time was to become like a producer, like Timbaland, or even a Dr. Dre, like or Rick Rubin, somebody that's in the studio. That's not necessarily creating, but was sort of like overseeing other bands, artists, working with them to bring their dream and vision to light. I always really loved being in the studio a lot. And when Wes came back from university, he wanted to start a band with this guy, Justin. And Justin said, well, not without Jer. So then that's how the Lumineers started, sort of, making a long story short. So it was interesting that when I met Wes, we were covering bands like Tom Petty and Coldplay and Bob Dylan and Sublime. Wes had already brought some songs of his to the table. And then, again, paraphrasing a lot of history, probably over the next 7 years, me and Wes had probably written close to 75 plus songs, even before the first Lumineers record came out. So yeah, music, I would say in high school, everything changed drastically for me with my love of music, big time.
It sounds like you have such a diverse group of influences. I'm wondering how you came across the Beatles for the first time. What were your thoughts when you first heard them? And where does their music come into play in terms of your influences?
Heard the Beatles, probably always through friends, maybe the odd song on the radio, like Eleanor Rigby. Or, really honestly too, I heard a lot of their music. I remember there was a Target commercial that ran on the East Coast in Jersey that had one of their songs. And I honestly kind of loathed the Beatles when I first heard them. I didn't like them. I thought it sounded too sugary, too polished. I didn't think there was any heart or soul. Again, this is me, like the know-it-all, arrogant teenager talking. And I don't know when it changed, but then at some point in my life, it did like the 180, which happens to a lot of bands that I've fallen in love with. The same thing happened when I first heard my favorite band of all time, Radiohead. Hated them, and then switched. Like I heard, I don't know what song it was for the Beatles, but I want to say that I always thought they were like, because you'd only hear the hits if you're not digging into their catalog. You were just hearing the hits on the radio, I feel like, or in commercials, the really, really poppy stuff, which is not always the best way to get into a band, obviously. You got to go dig deep, and then you're hearing the really beautiful music and the art. So I feel like my recollection was the first time I heard A Day in the Life. Like the first time I really got that song, I don't remember where or when, but I just remember at some point being like, wow, that's one of the coolest songs I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, how do you write something like that? The lyrics, all the changes, how it changes drastically and then comes back to the verse melody and the verse after that big crazy, I want to turn you on. That whole, it's just like a psychotic, it's almost like their Bohemian Rhapsody where there's all these changes and somehow it just makes sense. And I was like, how the hell do you write a song like that? And, it's hard to kind of talk about them when you're talking about your own music. It's almost like if you were talking about a soccer player trying to like compare yourself to Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo. It's like, you have to you feel like you're walking on eggshells because you're talking about comparing yourself to like one of the best bands of all time. So I would say though, if anyone listening to this listened to our last album, Bright Side, I would say I love this quote. I think Albert Einstein said it. I think it said something to the effect of genius is hiding your influences. Or no, sorry, creativity is hiding your influences. Something like that. Creativity is the ability to hide your influences, which I think is really profound. And I think that, you never want to sound like the Beatles. You never want to sound like any other band for that matter when you're in a band, when you're creating. Inevitable, those influences seep into your music. And I would say anyone that's listened to our last album, Bright Side, there's two songs on there in particular, AM Radio and Birthday. Birthday, really, I feel like you can hear a Beatles influence. The way I came in with this drum fill, you can really hear the influence from Come Together, that sort of amazing drum beat that Ringo uses the whole drum set. And I think that seeped into my head big time when making the drums on that song. And even when me and Wes, the singer of Lumineers, wrote that song together, the way the chord structures and the usage of sevenths and all that sort of nerdy stuff, again, it feels like one could make the connection. Oh, maybe these guys had listened to the Beatles at some point. So again, you're trying to draw that fine line. And then I think with the song AM Radio, there's this really great, change where if you listen to the song AM Radio, like the first minute and a half, we don't actually get to the chorus. and then out of nowhere you sort of have this like do do, and I think that that was almost, paying homage in some way to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, where you have this sort of idea, and then quite literally you have hmm, hmm, it just, like, what the hell, where did that come from, that surprise, that left turn out of nowhere. I think that, there was something that excited us about trying to do that in one of our songs, and I think AM Radio, again, I'd like to think we did it in a masterful way where somebody wouldn't be like, oh, they ripped off the Beatles. But at the end of the day, amateurs borrow, professionals steal. So if you're going to steal, you should steal from the Beatles. They're really one of the best bands ever. And I would say, like, one of their mantras when me and Wes were writing a lot of the Lumineer stuff, we had heard that either John Lennon or Paul McCartney had said something along the lines of, when you come up with a melodic idea and you think it's your chorus, make that a verse and then try to write a new chorus. And that's really hard to do. It's almost impossible to do if you literally try to do that. But honestly, it's almost frightening because when you listen to the Beatles, it seems like they actually did that. You pick any song, um, you probably know the names better than I do, but if you think of the top 5 songs that you, Jack, like more than any other Beatles song, pick 5 in your own head, almost every verse is just as catchy as any chorus. Like, their worst verse is most bands' best choruses. Even like "Hey Jude," that verse is ridiculous. "Come Together," that verse is ridiculous. Like, so many verses of the Beatles are some bands' best choruses, and then they had choruses, which is even crazier. So yeah, I don't know how the Beatles did it, and they did it also within about what, 7 years, something crazy. So yeah, it's pretty hard to talk about them sometimes because it makes me feel. I heard a quote the other day. I think it was, "Comparison is the death of joy," something like that. And I think that when I start to think about the Lumineers and the Beatles, um, I think it almost makes me feel physically like sick, like feeling smaller because you're like inevitably comparing yourself. I think what we're doing is cruel. It's really cool. I'm proud of our music, but yeah, when you try to compare yourself to the Beatles, you're inevitably going to fall short. What those guys did in that amount of time, at that rate at which they were doing it, it's really profound.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's hard not to copy the Beatles musically, or at least like hard not to copy bands that were influenced by the Beatles. And, I think many bands would say the exact same thing about the Lumineers. I mean, you guys trailblazed an entire genre in the last decade. How does it feel to now be in the position where you're now the major influence on people's music?
No, it's a really cool question. I've never been asked that before, and I've been thinking about that recently. So it's a great time to answer this question. I think it almost feels like a little bit of imposter syndrome takes over because I'll give you 2 good examples. Wes, the singer, he just put out a song with Noah Kahan, and then Noah, we were at the same festival in Boston, I think, and he came on stage with us on the Lumineer set and performed with us. And he was just like, "You guys, I love you guys. I can't believe I'm here. I love your guys' music. I grew up listening to your music. This is so crazy." And that meant a lot to listen to his music then and be like, wow, this guy's really talented. He's awesome. He's making great choices in the studio. He knows how to write songs. His lyrics are really interesting. And I sent him really a message. He had posted something on his Instagram, Noah, where it was a live version, backstage green room, just acoustic. And I emailed him and was like, dude, this is awesome. This is like, breaking my heart, blowing my mind, super cool. And he was just like, thanks, man. Like, wouldn't exist without the Lumineers, none of this music. And I think that really blew my mind where I'm seeing this guy blow up. He's touring all over the world. He's got great streaming numbers. He's probably got more followers on social media than we do. Like, he's just truly like blowing up and killing it and crushing it. And it's so, I don't know. I don't even know if it's humbling. It actually is. It also like makes me feel really, really good. I don't even like. It's just almost losing words about how that makes me feel. That it's crazy that we inspired him in some way. And the same thing happened. We just put out a song with this guy Zach Bryan, a song called "Spotless,"
And I did it remotely. I FaceTimed with Zach, my piano part, and some ideas I was doing. And again, he prefaced it. He's like, dude, this is amazing. I can't believe I'm talking to you. Like, any piano you do, I'm going to love. He told me on the phone call, any piano he has on his record is sort of directly influenced by what I'm doing. And it was a conversation that I would find myself having with Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead. If Johnny Greenwood ever did something with us, like, dude, you could do anything on guitar and we're going to keep it because I love you so much about what you do. So it was really, yeah, I don't know. It was really something. It was really cool to experience that, to feel that, and to feel the same level of respect and awe back at those two artists, Noah Kahan and Zach Bryan, and to see them crushing it also pretty surreal. Like, sometimes people too, they'll be like, well, you're in the Lumineers, like, as if that means something. The same way, like, I would say to, like, well, dude, you're in Coldplay, your life is fine. Like, I'm sure the members of Coldplay now understand what that means. I don't know if I know what that means yet. When people are like, you're in the Lumineers, I'm like, yeah, that's the band I'm in that we started 18, 19 years ago. But I don't know what that means to the rest of the world. I just know what it means to me, that, like, I feel like we still have scratched the surface of what we're capable creatively speaking. And I think that's really where the Beatles come into influence, where I think Bob Dylan may have said to Paul or John, like, I think he kind of dug into them a little bit. I think he said something like, you guys are pretty like vanilla. You guys are making like bubblegum pop. And I think that really like hurt them. And then they made, what's the album with Helter Skelter on it? Like the super dark.
Oh, the White Album.
Yeah. Like, I think that they were like, okay, Bob. Cause, like, I want to hold your hand. Like that's a Beatles song where I'm like, that was a song I probably got introduced to in my high school era. And I was like, this music sucks. Like, these lyrics are not interesting. It's bubblegum pop. It's like, I want to get with your gal. And like, it just didn't do anything for me creatively. And then you listen to the White Album and you're like, oh my God, like, this is heavy. And the lyrics changed. They started talking about stuff. The chord structures got, way out there. And those songs like Strawberry Fields and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Helter Skelter, those are like really heavy songs that are going to be studied until the end of time. Their chord structures, how the melodies, lyrically, everything about that. The time signature changes, the tempo changes. I mean, even A Day in the Life, like, those songs are crazy. And I think when I heard those, it then gave more credence, and it made me love, though, then ironically, I Want to Hold Your Hand and Can't Buy Me Love and the sweeter sounding songs, where I was like, it was almost like Matthew McConaughey has a great parallel. He was in all these like rom-coms, and I think the world at large was like, he's a bankable actor. Every studio's like, let's put him in a rom-com and he'll deliver. And I saw this interview where he was talking about, he said no to a lot of projects, and then all the rom-coms disappeared. And I think he thought, like, oh crap, my career's over. I've just like, I'm done. And I think he said he turned down like a $20 million contract for a movie because he was like, long term, I want to be seen as a real actor. And then sure enough, he got the True Detective call that changed his whole like career. And then he was in like True Detective, Interstellar, and all these movies that changed his career. And now Wolf of Wall Street. And then people were like, holy cow, this dude can act and he can do all this stuff. And I think that's almost a parallel I had with the Beatles, where I was like, again, as an arrogant, know-it-all 17-year-old, I was like, this is all they're good for. I don't like their music, but I still respected them. And then I changed into like, I love their music. And anytime I've ever heard someone say like, I hate the Beatles, I'll get like pretty emotionally invested into it, where I'm like, you can hate them, but you can't say they suck. It's like, for me, it'd be like saying like, the writing of Harry Potter sucks or the writing of Shakespeare sucks. It's like, you could not like the poetry, you cannot like the plays, you cannot like the books that they wrote, the stories, but categorically, the writing is like superb. That's the way I feel about the Beatles. Like, even if you hate their music, I'll get like emotionally invested where I'm like, yeah, but trust me. As someone that writes songs and tries to write songs, like their stuff is like, I respect if you hate it, but you can't say they suck, or you can't say that they like didn't know how to play their instruments, because what they were doing intentionally on all those records was like really mind blowing. And I don't think it will be repeated anytime soon. I don't think we'll see another band in our lifetime that will do that. Maybe in 30, 40 years, we'll start to see a new band emerge that might do that, but I don't even know. It might be another century, another 100 years before another band even comes close to doing what they did in such a short period of time. Really, like, it's hard to put into words.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think part of the reason why they're still incredibly popular is because, like, when they were leading the entire 60s, like, they were leading the pack, they were spearheading all of the changes being made to popular music. But while they were doing that, they were still writing music about what meant the most to them. So I guess, like, as a creative yourself, how do you in the Lumineers, how do you innovate and try to find new sounds while still maintaining musical integrity and making songs that are true to you?
I think there's a lot of things that go into it. I think two good examples are probably, arguably our biggest songs with Ho Hey and Ophelia. I think that once you have the song written and you see what it is, meaning like, okay, this is the tempo, this is the key, these are all the lyrics, these are all the melodies, this is the demo of the song. Once you decide to immortalize it in the studio, that's sort of the most intense and most important moment of your life, if you think of it that way, because um, some people look at themselves as a live band. Some people look at themselves as a studio band. I've always considered us both. I think if you're a band like Fish, Grateful Dead, you're really like, let's make records, but the live is really where it's at. Even Dave Matthews Band, they made cool records, but live, it was like, it's a whole nother skill set. And it's incredibly talented that these people are able to go up every night and improvise and innovate. I think that that's incredibly difficult. But with the Lumineers, it's trying to do things that are differently, but you got to be careful. You never want to just do things differently just to be different. And I'll give you a good example. If you listen to Ho Hey and you listen to Ophelia, I think if you gave that song to 99 other drummers, I think that I probably would have been the only one to lay down those drums, or lack thereof. I think after every Lumineers concert, even before the first album broke, one of the best, one of the biggest assets that me and Wes had was that we would talk the next day over coffee, usually at a diner or over some beers after the show. We would talk about what did we do good, and then more importantly, what can we do better. And I think that all the decisions you make as a band, that's like half of it. And then it's like all the things that you say, let's not do this, this, and this. That's almost more important. I've always thought about, I don't know if it makes sense, but I've always thought of that in my head. All the things that you don't do are actually going to be more important to your career. And you see that with like famous directors, whether it's Stanley Kubrick, M. Night Shyamalan, Alfred Hitchcock. They all had these things that they didn't do, which it's a little bit like semantics, the things you are doing, the things you're not doing. But I guess what I'm trying to say specifically is with those two songs, Ho Hey and Ophelia, could have laid down some drums, drum set, kick drum, snare drum, maybe some hi-hats. And I think those songs would have been not what they became and not how they are remembered for people. And I think that if you listen, you'll hear a lot of foot stomps. I'm a big fan of like recording knuckles on the piano, knuckles on wood. If you listen to our music with headphones, I would say in the last record, Bright Side, it was probably the most like traditional drum set stuff you'll ever hear from me. If you listen to album one, I think there's probably like 7 crash cymbals on the whole album. And that was all intentional. And that's where maybe now I'm starting to make sense. All the things we decided not to do made that first record stand out more. The song Slow It Down, one of my favorite recordings of all time that we did. Wes was in our living room, sort of, in like a little office. We put a guitar amp in the kitchen. We opened up a window. I put a mic out the window for some noise, ambience of the earth, birds, whatever. And that's the recording. Now, when we went into the studio to actually re-record that whole album, because we had all these demos and we had to sort of re-record all the demos to make it to the real recording, the producer at the time wanted us to redo that and try to capture the magic. And Wes did a bunch of takes, maybe 5, 10 takes to slow it down. But the take we captured in our house in Denver, Colorado, with the window open in the kitchen recording and just how janky it was, that was the magic. And if you listen, you can hear those stuff. And even like we added bass to that song, we deleted the bass. I tried adding drums, and we have drums on that song live, which is just a kick drum and tambourine. But again, the immortalization of that song was just the guitar and vocals. And even the way Ho Hey builds and the way Ophelia builds, there's like subtle kick drum recordings and some subtle floor tom overdubs and stuff. But the majority of that track is me, Wes, and the producer, Simon Felice, stomping on wood and trying to be like, we know we can't reinvent the wheel in 2023, at the time 2012, 2015 for the second album, but how can we like try to put our little thumbprint, our DNA on this, without trying to be so weird just for the sake of being weird. So it's those little things, I think, that help. Maybe have somebody else play the tambourine so it's not me overdubbing it, so then you have this sort of interesting layering of different people's rhythms and stuff. I think there's all these things that, I mean, I could talk to you for probably 15 hours straight about all the nitty gritty nerdy stuff that we do, and you could pick a Lumineers song and ask me, and I could tell you X, Y, and Z about why we made the decision about this guitar amp setting, or the reverb on Wes's vocal, or the lack of reverb on Wes's vocal, or why are there drums on this song and why are there no drums on Slow It Down. I could talk to the cows come home about that, but I think that trying to immortalize the records, and there's been songs in my mind that I won't say where I'm like, damn, I wish we recorded that song a little bit faster for the studio version. But I think that we got the majority of our songs. I think we did it right in the studio. That's a big pressure you have as an artist. You're like, you bleed and you sweat and you cry to finish those albums, metaphorically and actually sometimes, and you hope you get it right. Live is a different ball game. Live, you can take some liberties where you're like, well, we did that in the recording, but let's do this live. Let's add some drums. Let's make it a little bit faster, whatever it might be. But I think that, I don't know what the Lumineers will be remembered as. I feel like I've heard an overwhelming amount that maybe we're considered the live band. I think that we play really well together, the six of us. We all love each other. We respect each other. We've all been playing together for so long now that the live concert, I think, does something to people. I think it connects with people. I think that when we play small shows, I'd like to think we have this ability to make it feel big. And conversely, I think when we play big shows, we somehow capture an intimacy that might not be there in a stadium, And I think that the records, the studio side, that's actually my favorite part of being in a band, of being an artist, is the studio. It's really like, it's such an addicting, fun, interesting thing to be a part of. And I think we've done a good job of trying to capture our records on wax, so to speak.
Oh my God, yeah, they're the most incredible records of the last decade or two.
It means a lot, man. Again, like that means a lot. And sometimes you'll listen to like what the Beatles are doing or Radiohead, or even someone more modern like Billie Eilish, and you're like, man, how do you get the drums to sound so big, or this or that? And it's just it actually is like funny to me that maybe another artist is like listening to one of our songs, like, how did you get this to sound like that? And you're like, I don't know, we just recorded it. That's just at the end of the day too, you're like, well, we just thought that sounded good. There's not really too much, there's not much more than that. Like in the studio, you're listening to stuff for references, for inspiration. Maybe it's an old Bowie track, maybe it's an old Red Hot Chili Peppers track, maybe it's a Dolly Parton song. You find inspiration in the studio in the strangest of places, but you listen to stuff and you're like, that was cool. And of course, you never want to rip off or try to like steal anything. but you get inspired and you're like, well, that was really cool. How'd they do that? Well, let's try to do something that maybe is similar, but still like with the Lumineers thumbprint on it. So
Speaking of your live shows and studio albums, do you have a favorite Lumineers song to perform live or listen back to when you're going through your discography?
yeah, I think one of my favorite songs to perform to this day is still "Sleep on the Floor" and "Salt in the Sea." "Sleep on the Floor" is a song that I just think it's one of the best songs I've ever written. To be honest, I love that song. I've never gotten tired of playing that song, and every night it just gets a huge reaction from the crowd. And selfishly, it's just so fun to play. I've literally never got. I've like, some nights you're on the road and you're out there doing 100 shows plus per year, and you get a little road weary. But for whatever reason, that song, it always goes by like that. It's so fun to play. And another song I really love is from the third album, Three, Salt in the Sea, where I just think it's such a fun song to play. It's such a different song for the Lumineer sound. That song is one of those songs that I think, in my mind, the same way I felt about the Beatles, like, oh, I just know them for "Oh Hey" and "Ophelia" and "Stubborn Love." Let me hear something with a tad more darkness to it. You show them My Cell, Salt and Sea, or Jimmy Sparks, and then they're like, oh, I didn't know they also dip their toes in this. Which then I hope when they go back and listen to those other songs they just mentioned, they're like, oh, cool. There's like a lot of intentionalness going on with this band. But yeah, Salt and the Sea, like I just heard a live snippet of that on social media the other day, and I was like, damn, that sounds really cool. Sometimes you listen to your own yourself and you kind of wince and you cringe and you're like, I can't listen to myself. But I heard that the other day randomly. I was, wow, that sounds huge and that's cool. I'm proud of that. That's neat.
One of my favorite things about the Lumineers concert that I went to a few weeks ago is that you guys come out of the gate with your top hits like Ho Hey and Cleopatra or Ophelia right away. But
Yeah.
then you go on to perform a 2-hour show, and it's just like, oh my gosh, wow, you don't stop bringing the hits. To an average fan, they're probably thinking, oh wow, I didn't know they sing this song too. I love this song. And just, I think it's the same thing with the Beatles, just to make another connection between you guys and the Beatles. If you're an average Beatles fan and you put their music on shuffle, I bet you'll listen to a few songs and think, "Oh wow, I didn't know they sang this one too."
That means a lot, man. I think like, that's a huge honor. And I think that there's two ways to approach the studio experience, which will inevitably influence the rest of your career and your live performance is. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like there's bands that when they come out with the first record, maybe you have a hit single, and out of fear of becoming a one-hit wonder, you try to replicate that and duplicate that. You talk to any artist, it's almost impossible to do it once. And to try to do it again is like a fool's game. And I think that what happens sometimes is people will just worry about certain artists, and I'm not going to name any, but I've definitely like fallen in love with artists that maybe start off with like, oh, they had a single that was a really cool single, and then they released their follow up album, and like you can kind of tell like, okay, on the follow up album they had this song that was really good. Maybe it was another hit single, maybe it was another pop hit, and then you listen to the other tracks and you're like, man, you can just tell they didn't work on these. They worked on this song 90% of the time. Maybe they hired like Max Martin or Rick Rubin or like a big time Ryan Tedder, like a big time producer to like ensure that because and then I mean you can have a career like that though. You can do that. You can have, a hit single and then an okay album. And then you can have a follow-up album and you can have a hit single or something that's even just good enough. And then like the rest of the album can be like, eh. And you can have a career. You can tour the country, you can tour the world, playing 25 to 5,000 capacity venues, maybe even bigger. And you can survive as a band because never underestimate the power of one good song. People will literally go to an artist just to see that one song. And I think our way of dealing with that was that we literally play Ho Hey either second or third in our set. And we've been doing that since that song came out. That was our way of being like, if people are here just to hear that song, here it is. It's like within the first 10 minutes of our set. And if that's all you were here for, there's the door, and then the rest of the fans can stay. And I think that that was our way of being like, let's see what we're made of as a band. And I think that me and Wes, when we make records, we never wanted to be a band where people would hit skip, skip, skip. Oh, here's the song I heard on that movie or commercial. Skip, skip, skip. And I think with first album, we really had all this intent to like, you're gonna hear, what is it, Flowers in Your Hair, and then I think it goes into Classic Girls. There was maybe, and then Submarines. I honestly forget, but I think then like, oh, okay, album 2, Cleopatra. You're gonna start off with Sleep on the Floor with this like weird. We called it the Demon Trucker sample. It reminded us of like this possessed demon trucker, and then these big drums into Ophelia, and we were like, holy cow, what a way to start a record. And then 3 started with this dreamy Donna, and with album 4, Bright Side, starting off with these huge drums, the self-titled song Bright Side. There was all this intent that we were like, we want to be a band that people listen to when they're going through stuff in their life, good stuff, bad stuff, when they're moving across the country or going on a road trip with their friends. They want to like listen to this album and not be like, remember iPods where you could just pick like the one song you like from the band, and then we never wanted to be like an iPod band where it's like, oh, that Lumineers band, let's throw on that one song and then like, let's change it. Like, I love the idea of someone being like, yo, I drove from, I don't know, Portland, Oregon down to LA, and we listened to like Cleopatra the whole record, and it's just, we never wanted to skip it once. And that's how I fell in love with some of my favorite bands. I mean, Dr. Dog's album Fate did that for me, where I don't want to skip one song. Bright Eyes, I'm Wide Awake, It's Morning. Pretty much every Radiohead album for me, because I'm a diehard fan. The first 2 albums of Coldplay. There's just these records that really touched me in a way where I'm like, I wouldn't change one thing about this record. I would never skip a song. And if we can do that for other bands, then that's all I would really want, I think.
I think you've definitely accomplished that, because that's exactly the way that I listen to the Lumineers. There's something very redeeming about listening to the Lumineers. Like if I listen to a Lumineers album on a car ride, it's almost like the equivalent of going to church on like a Sunday.
That's awesome.
It just feels very good for the soul. And speaking of albums, you mentioned the White Album earlier. Do you have a favorite Beatles album or a favorite Beatles song?
What is A Day in the Life is my favorite Beatles song. I mean, it's honestly, it's a close second to, is it Two of Us?
Yeah.
Two of
Yep.
Us wearing raincoats. I probably like flip flop between those 2 songs. I'm usually not a guy that will say like, oh, the big hit is going to be my favorite song by a band. And I think people that really love music, it's probably generally, that's probably the case for them. It's pretty unlikely that like your favorite Tom Petty song is going to be Free Falling. Incredible song, but you're probably going to be like, oh, Running Down a Dream, which in its own right is another big hit. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think for me, I can't tell which one I like more. I'd probably have to go with A Day in the Life. There's something about that song that's so sad and melancholy and so interesting, and the way the drums sound, the way they feel. So what record is that off of?
That's on Sgt. Pepper.
Do you know like every Beatles, like if I asked you trivia, do you know it all pretty much?
Yes, probably. Hopefully I know it all.
I just watched that really long documentary that, got a lot of attention, and it was incredible. I think the one that Peter Jackson did.
Oh, Get Back.
Yeah, and it was incredible. I mean, it just like watching Paul bring in. Oh, that's another song I really love. What album is that on? Paul brings in. He's playing "Let It Be," which I love. But there's another song, "Slumber," "Golden Slumber."
Oh, Golden Slumbers.
What album is that?
That's on Abbey Road. Yeah, the whole second side of Abbey Road is just, medley of song after song, and it all leads into each other, and it builds to a crescendo with Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight.
Yeah, that album might be my favorite. I mean, that song too, Golden Slumbers, when I hear that, I'm just like, wow, like how do you, it's just right out of the gates. There's all these crazy chord changes, and then going to Carry That Weight, it's just incredible. But so maybe that one, Sgt. Pepper's I know, but I think I think that's one where I still struggle with a little bit because that one has a lot of crazy changes, right? Every song is like pretty like whimsical, and I'd have to almost look on the CD track listing, but let's go with Abbey Road.
Very cool. And what do you think it is about the Beatles that makes them still relevant to audiences today? And what do you think is the secret to making timeless music?
I think the Beatles are still relevant today just because the power of their melodies. Again, like the worst Beatles song is probably a lot of bands' best song. That's how good they were, truly. And I think that timeless music, almost like the power of a song, or even the power of song, capital S. Again, never underestimate that. Artists like Dolly Parton and Bob Dylan and the Beatles and Elvis and countless others, Leonard Cohen, these are people that made songs that will be covered until the end of time because they were just that good. And I think Pink Floyd's another great example where that word timeless, what is timeless? It just it's like it's weatherproof, it's time proof. It never really starts to age, never really starts to feel like, oh wow, that's such a 90s sound. Oh wow, that's such like a early 2000 sound. It just ages so well. And I think the Beatles did that perfectly.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So, Jeremiah, are you making any new music currently? I know you guys are on tour right now, but are you planning on coming out with any new projects soon?
Yeah, so I just released an album with a buddy of mine, this Taylor Dupree record. It's called Northern Redux. It's a remake of his album called Northern. It's on my Spotify and all my streaming stuff too, as Jeremiah Fraites. It's a new album that just came out this year, and it's a lot of piano that I wrote. That in some sort of way, it's sort of an extension of piano. And piano is a record I released 2 or 3 years ago. It's an instrumental record I wrote that is around revolves around the piano, but is, yeah, something I really am proud of. And that was a record that my wife came up with the title Piano Piano. She's Italian, and piano translates to little by little. And that was a great album title that she came up with because those piano ideas were the better part of 10 years in the making. So the fact that it took that long to make that record, it didn't literally take that long, but I put that out, and I'm working on Piano 2 actually right now. And I hope to release that sometime next year with a subsequent tour, both in Europe and the United States, of course. But yeah, this new album, Northern Redux, it's me as Jeremiah Fraites and this guy, Taylor Dupree. It's really a cool record. I'd really highly recommend checking it out if you're going on a walk or driving. Wear some headphones, take a walk around your city or the woods or something. A lot of new piano. It's sort of an extension of my piano stuff. But and I'm really excited about working on this new piano record as well.
Awesome. And I'm going to leave all of those links in the podcast description
Oh,
so
cool.
anyone listening can go click on those as they're listening.
Thanks, man.
And Jeremiah, I just wanted to thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's really been a true honor to be able to speak with you today.
Likewise. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. I just wanted to give another big thank you to Jeremiah Fraites for coming on the podcast. Please check out his solo album linked in the podcast description, and be sure to follow the Lumineers on all social media if you don't already. If you liked this episode, be sure to rate it and leave a review and subscribe to this podcast. Follow at Beatles Earth on all social media for more updates. And as always, I'll see you next week with a brand new episode.